Marcus Rodriguez had lived in Sunset Oaks for 12 years, watching his neighborhood transform from a quiet coastal community into a pristine subdivision ruled by an increasingly strict homeowners association. His modest two-story house sat on Pelican Drive, just 3 blocks from the beach. The home wasn't the largest or most expensive in the area, but Marcus had spent years reinforcing it against Florida's unpredictable weather. When Hurricane Elena began forming in the Atlantic, Marcus knew this storm would be different. The meteorologist spoke in hushed tones about unprecedented wind speeds and storm surge predictions that made seasoned residents nervous. Elena was tracking directly toward their stretch of coastline, and the evacuation orders came swiftly. Most of his neighbors packed their cars and headed inland to stay with relatives or in hotel rooms far from the coast. The HOA president, Patricia Whitman, made sure to send out multiple emails reminding residents about proper storm preparation protocols and evacuation procedures. She emphasized that homeowners would be held responsible for any damage caused by inadequate preparation. Marcus had a different plan. Years earlier, after Hurricane Andrew devastated South Florida, he had invested heavily in stormproofing his home. He installed impact-resistant windows, reinforced his roof with hurricane clips, and even had a backup generator system installed in a weatherproof enclosure. His garage contained sheets of marine-grade plywood, pre-cut and labeled for each window and door. As Elena approached, Marcus methodically prepared his house. He secured every window and door with the plywood barriers, cleared his yard of any loose items that could become projectiles, and trimmed back the large oak tree in his front yard that had worried him for months. His neighbors watched from their cars as they evacuated, some shaking their heads at what they saw as foolish stubbornness. The night before Elena made landfall, Marcus sat in his reinforced living room, listening to the wind beginning to howl outside. His generator hummed quietly in the background, keeping his refrigerator running and his phones charged. He had enough food and water for 2 weeks, and his storm shutters were holding firm against the increasingly violent gusts. Elena arrived with the fury that meteorologists had predicted. For 18 hours, winds exceeding 140 miles per hour battered the coastline. Marcus felt his house shake and creak, but the reinforcements held. He could hear debris striking his plywood barriers and the sound of what seemed like entire trees being uprooted nearby. When morning finally came, and Elena moved inland, Marcus cautiously removed one of his storm shutters to peer outside. The scene was devastating. Ancient oak trees lay across streets like fallen giants. Roofs had been peeled back like sardine cans, and debris was scattered everywhere. Many homes had lost entire sections of their structures, with furniture and personal belongings strewn across yards and streets. But Marcus's house stood virtually untouched. The reinforcements had worked exactly as designed. His roof was intact, his windows were whole, and even his landscaping had suffered minimal damage thanks to his careful preparation. As he walked around his property, he felt a mixture of relief and sadness for his neighbors who hadn't been as fortunate. The cleanup would take months, and the community would need to come together to rebuild. Marcus began removing his storm barriers, ready to help his neighbors in whatever way he could. He had no idea that his successful storm preparation would soon become the source of an entirely different kind of disaster. 3 days after Hurricane Elena passed, Marcus was in his front yard helping his elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen clear fallen branches when Patricia Whitman pulled into his driveway. The HOA president stepped out of her pristine white SUV, clipboard in hand, surveying the neighborhood damage with the efficiency of a military inspector. Patricia had always been particular about neighborhood appearances. Even before the storm, she was known for measuring grass heights with a ruler and sending violation notices for mailboxes that needed repainting. Her own house, a sprawling Mediterranean-style mansion at the entrance of the subdivision, had suffered significant roof damage and flooding. Temporary tarps covered large sections where tiles had been torn away. She approached Marcus with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. The contrast between his intact property and the widespread destruction around them seemed to intensify her scrutiny of his home. Every detail appeared to irritate her further. His undamaged mailbox, his still-functioning landscape lighting, even the fact that his driveway was already cleared of debris. "Marcus, I need to document the storm damage for our insurance claims and FEMA applications," Patricia announced, not bothering with pleasantries. She began photographing his house from multiple angles. paying particular attention to areas where his property bordered his neighbors' damaged homes. Marcus found her behavior strange, but assumed she was simply being thorough in her role as HOA president. He continued helping Mrs. Chen, whose garage door had been completely destroyed by a flying piece of someone else's roof. The elderly woman was grateful for his assistance, especially since most other neighbors were dealing with their own extensive damage. Over the next week, Marcus noticed Patricia driving by his house multiple times each day, sometimes stopping to take more photographs or make notes on her ever-present clipboard. She seemed especially interested in his fence line and the mature oak tree that had protected his property from much of the wind damage. The first sign of trouble came in the form of an official letter from the HOA, delivered exactly 10 days after the hurricane. Marcus opened it expecting routine post-storm communication about community cleanup efforts or insurance procedures. Instead, he found a formal notice of violation, citing multiple infractions related to failure to maintain community standards during emergency weather events. The letter accused him of violating HOA covenants by not properly securing outdoor furniture, failing to trim vegetation in accordance with storm preparation guidelines, and creating an attractive nuisance that allegedly contributed to debris damage on neighboring properties. Each violation carried a fine of $500, with additional daily penalties if not corrected within 30 days. Marcus read the letter 3 times, unable to understand how his meticulous storm preparation could be characterized as violations. He had followed every recommended safety protocol and had actually exceeded most guidelines. His outdoor furniture had been properly stored, his vegetation had been appropriately trimmed, and his property had generated virtually no debris that could have damaged other homes. The most puzzling accusation involved his oak tree, which the letter claimed had created wind patterns that directed debris toward neighboring properties. Marcus knew this was absurd. The tree had actually shielded several homes from the worst of the storm damage. Without it, the destruction in his immediate area would have been far worse. That evening, Marcus called Patricia directly, hoping to resolve what he assumed was a misunderstanding. Her response was coldly professional and offered no room for discussion. She informed him that the violations had been thoroughly documented and that the HOA board had voted unanimously to pursue enforcement action. Umpires pressed for details about the specific evidence supporting these claims, but Patricia simply repeated that the violations were valid and that he had 30 days to pay the fines and address the cited issues. When he asked about appealing the decision, she mentioned that appeals required a written request and a non-refundable filing fee of $250. As Marcus hung up the phone, he realized that his successful storm preparation had somehow made him a target. While his neighbors struggled with insurance companies and contractors, he was facing accusations that seemed designed to punish him for the very actions that had saved his home. Marcus spent the weekend researching his HOA's covenants and bylaws, determined to understand the legal basis for the violations. He discovered that the documents were deliberately vague about storm preparation requirements, using phrases like reasonable care and community standards, without specific definitions. This ambiguity seemed intentional, giving the board broad discretionary power to interpret violations as they saw fit. Monday morning brought another surprise visit from Patricia, this time accompanied by a man in an expensive suit who introduced himself as David Kellerman, the HOA's attorney. They requested permission to inspect Marcus's property more thoroughly, claiming they needed to document the full extent of damage caused by his negligent storm preparation. Marcus reluctantly agreed to the inspection, curious to see what evidence they thought they had. For 2 hours, Kellerman photographed every inch of his property, while Patricia took detailed notes. They paid particular attention to his fence, measuring distances between his oak tree and his neighbor's damaged structures, and documenting the minimal debris in his yard compared to surrounding properties. The inspection felt more like a criminal investigation than a routine HOA matter. Kellerman asked pointed questions about Marcus's storm preparation timeline, his decision not to evacuate, and his modifications to the house over the years. Marcus answered honestly, explaining his reinforcement efforts and his experience with previous storms. What disturbed Marcus most was their focus on his neighbor's damage, rather than his own property. They seemed less interested in any actual violations on his part, and more concerned with establishing a connection between his intact house and the destruction surrounding it. This approach suggested they were building a case for something far more serious than simple covenant violations. Later that week, Marcus received a second letter from the HOA attorney demanding immediate payment of the initial fines, plus additional penalties for ongoing violations. The total amount had grown to $3,000, and the letter threatened legal action if payment wasn't received within 10 days. The letter also included a new accusation that Marcus's storm preparations had been inadequate and negligent, creating liability for the HOA and the community. This was particularly galling since his preparations had been exemplary and had actually protected neighboring properties from additional damage. Marcus decided to consult his own attorney, a family friend named Sarah Patel, who specialized in property law. Sarah reviewed the HOA documents and the violation notices with growing concern. She explained that while HOAs had broad authority to enforce community standards, the accusations against Marcus appeared to be legally groundless and potentially retaliatory. Sarah's investigation revealed several troubling patterns in the HOA's recent enforcement actions. Under Patricia's leadership, violation notices had increased dramatically, and fines had become a significant source of revenue for the association. More concerning was the discovery that Patricia's husband owned a construction company that had recently won several lucrative contracts for storm damage repairs in the neighborhood. The connection between the HOA president's personal financial interests and the aggressive pursuit of violations against Marcus began to paint a clearer picture of what was happening. Patricia wasn't just enforcing community standards. She was using her position to create business opportunities for her family while punishing homeowners who didn't need their services. Sarah advised Marcus that he was likely being targeted because his successful storm preparation made him a visible reminder that proper planning could prevent the kind of expensive damage that was generating profits for Patricia's husband's company. By portraying Marcus as negligent and liable for his neighbor's problems, Patricia could potentially force him to pay for repairs he hadn't caused while discouraging other homeowners from taking similar protective measures. The legal battle was just beginning, and Marcus realized he was fighting not just for his own property rights, but for the principle that homeowners shouldn't be punished for taking responsible action to protect their homes. The very success of his storm preparation had made him an enemy of an HOA that seemed more interested in generating revenue than protecting residents. Marcus's attorney Sarah filed a formal response challenging the HOA's violations and demanding documentation to support their claims. The response also requested all communications between HOA board members regarding Marcus's property and any financial relationships between board members and contractors working in the neighborhood. Patricia's reaction was swift and aggressive. Within days, Marcus received a notice that the HOA was placing a lien on his property for unpaid fines and penalties, which had now grown to over $5,000 with daily accumulating interest. The lien would prevent him from selling or refinancing his home until the matter was resolved. The situation escalated further when Patricia began organizing other homeowners against Marcus. She held a special community meeting, ostensibly to discuss storm recovery efforts, but spent most of the time describing Marcus as an uncooperative neighbor who was refusing to take responsibility for damage he had allegedly caused. Many residents were struggling with their own insurance claims and repair costs, making them receptive to Patricia's suggestion that Marcus should contribute to community recovery efforts. She skillfully avoided mentioning that her husband's company was benefiting from many of these repair contracts, instead framing the issue as a matter of community solidarity and shared responsibility. Marcus attended the meeting to defend himself, bringing photographs and documentation of his storm preparations. He explained how his reinforcements had actually protected neighboring properties and offered to help other homeowners implement similar protective measures for future storms. His presentation was met with mixed reactions. Some neighbors, particularly those who had witnessed his careful preparation and helpful attitude after the storm, supported him openly. Mrs. Chen spoke emotionally about how Marcus had helped her file insurance claims and clear debris from her property without asking for anything in return. However, other residents remained suspicious, influenced by Patricia's characterization of the situation and frustrated by their own recovery struggles. The meeting ended with the community deeply divided, with Patricia calling for a formal vote of no confidence in Marcus's continued membership in the neighborhood association. The legal pressure continued to mount when Patricia's attorney filed a formal lawsuit against Marcus, claiming damages on behalf of the HOA and individual homeowners whose properties had allegedly been harmed by his negligent storm preparation. The lawsuit sought not only payment of the accumulated fines but also reimbursement for his neighbors, repair costs, and punitive damages for his willful disregard of community welfare. Sarah reviewed the lawsuit documents with increasing disbelief at their legal overreach. The claims were not only factually baseless, but appeared to violate several state laws regarding HOA authority and homeowner rights. However, she warned Marcus that defending against the lawsuit would be expensive and time-consuming, which seemed to be part of Patricia's strategy. The stress of the situation began affecting Marcus's daily life. He found himself documenting every interaction with neighbors, saving all correspondence, and constantly worrying about what new accusation might arrive in his mailbox. The community he had called home for over a decade no longer felt welcoming or safe. Things reached a breaking point when Marcus discovered that Patricia had been spreading rumors about his suspicious behavior during the storm, suggesting to some neighbors that his decision to stay behind had been motivated by plans to burglarize evacuated homes. These malicious accusations were completely unfounded but served to further poison community sentiment against him. Marcus realized that Patricia's campaign had moved beyond simple harassment into territory that could seriously damage his reputation and livelihood. As a software engineer who worked from home, his professional relationships and community standing were crucial to his career. The false accusations about criminal behavior crossed a line that demanded decisive action. Sarah advised that the time had come to take the offensive in their legal strategy. Rather than simply defending against Patricia's accusations, they would investigate her conduct and file their own complaints against the HOA for harassment, defamation, and abuse of authority. The evidence was growing stronger each day that Patricia was using her position for personal gain, while systematically targeting homeowners who didn't fit her agenda. Sarah's investigation into the HOA's financial records revealed a pattern of corruption that went far beyond Marcus's case. Public records showed that Patricia's husband's construction company had received over $2 million in contracts from storm-damaged homeowners in their neighborhood, many of whom had been referred by Patricia herself during helpful visits to assess damage. More damaging was the discovery that Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for legal fees related to enforcement actions, including the lawsuit against Marcus. This violated state laws requiring homeowner approval for such expenditures and gave Marcus grounds for a significant countersuit against both Patricia personally and the HOA as an organization. Sarah also uncovered communications between Patricia and her attorney that revealed their true strategy. Email exchanges showed they were deliberately targeting homeowners whose properties had minimal damage, hoping to extract settlement payments rather than pursue legitimate violation cases. Marcus had simply been their most visible target because his house stood out so dramatically among the widespread destruction. Armed with this evidence, Sarah filed a comprehensive complaint with the state attorney general's office alleging corruption, misuse of HOA authority, and violations of homeowner protection statutes. She also filed a defamation lawsuit against Patricia personally, seeking damages for the false accusations about Marcus's character and conduct. The investigation attracted attention from local media, particularly after Sarah provided reporters with evidence of the financial connections between HOA enforcement actions and Patricia's family business. The story of a homeowner being punished for successfully protecting his property during a hurricane resonated with readers who were dealing with their own post-storm challenges. Channel 7 News ran a segment featuring interviews with Marcus and several neighbors who supported him, contrasting his helpful post-storm behavior with Patricia's aggressive enforcement actions. The reporter also discovered that similar complaints had been filed against Patricia in neighboring communities, suggesting a pattern of abuse that extended beyond Marcus's case. The media attention prompted other homeowners to come forward with their own stories of questionable HOA enforcement actions. A retired teacher named Robert Martinez revealed that he had been fined for excessive landscape damage after the storm, despite the fact that his trees had been destroyed by hurricane winds completely beyond his control. Another resident, Jennifer Walsh, described receiving violation notices for having construction materials visible in her driveway while making storm repairs that the HOA had specifically required. The pattern of contradictory and punitive enforcement became increasingly clear as more homeowners shared their experiences. Patricia's support within the community began to crumble as residents realized they could be next targets of her enforcement campaigns. The HOA board, previously unified behind her leadership, started questioning her methods and the legal exposure she was creating for the association. The turning point came when the state attorney general's office announced a formal investigation into the HOA's practices and Patricia's potential conflicts of interest. This investigation carried the possibility of criminal charges for corruption and fraud, raising the stakes far beyond the civil litigation between Marcus and the association. Patricia's attorney advised her to settle the case against Marcus quickly to avoid further scrutiny, but Patricia refused, apparently believing she could still prevail through intimidation and legal maneuvering. This decision proved to be a critical mistake that would ultimately lead to her downfall. Meanwhile, Marcus had gathered support from an unexpected source, a group of homeowners from other neighborhoods who had faced similar HOA harassment. They formed a coalition to push for stronger state oversight of homeowner associations and protection for residents who became targets of overzealous enforcement actions. The coalition's advocacy efforts gained momentum as more stories emerged of HOAs using violation notices and legal threats to extract money from homeowners who were already struggling with storm recovery. Marcus's case had become a symbol of a much larger problem affecting communities throughout Florida. The state investigation moved quickly once investigators gained access to the HOA's financial records and communication systems. Within 6 weeks, they had documented clear evidence of corruption, including payments from Patricia's husband's company to the HOA's legal fund that were disguised as donations but actually represented kickbacks. For referred business, Patricia was arrested on charges of fraud, corruption, and misuse of fiduciary authority. The dramatic scene of her being led away in handcuffs from an emergency HOA board meeting was captured by news cameras and broadcast throughout the region. Her husband's construction company also faced criminal charges for participating in the kickback scheme. The HOA board immediately suspended all pending enforcement actions and hired an independent attorney to review every violation notice issued during Patricia's tenure. Marcus's case was among the first to be dismissed, with the board issuing a formal apology and refunding all fines and legal fees he had paid. More importantly for Marcus, the new board president, Mrs. Chen, worked with him to establish new storm preparation guidelines that encouraged rather than penalized proactive protective measures. Marcus's successful hurricane reinforcements became a model for other homeowners, and he found himself advising neighbors on how to better protect their properties. The legal resolution came 9 months after Hurricane Elena, when Patricia pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison, plus restitution payments to affected homeowners. Her husband received a similar sentence, and their construction company was permanently barred from operating in the state. Marcus received a substantial settlement from the HOA's insurance company, which covered his legal fees, damages for harassment and defamation, and compensation for the stress and disruption he had endured. However, the most satisfying outcome was the complete vindication of his storm preparation efforts and the recognition that he had been targeted for doing exactly what responsible homeowners should do. The case attracted national attention from property rights advocates and led to legislative changes in Florida's HOA oversight laws. The new regulations required greater transparency in HOA finances, stronger conflict of interest rules for board members, and additional protections for homeowners facing enforcement actions. Marcus used part of his settlement to establish a foundation that provides storm preparation resources to homeowners in hurricane-prone areas. The foundation offers free consultations, discounted materials, and educational workshops on protecting properties from severe weather damage. 2 years later, when Hurricane Felix threatened the same coastline, Marcus's neighborhood was significantly better prepared. Many homeowners had implemented reinforcements similar to those that had protected his house during Elena, and the community suffered far less damage despite the storm's intensity. Marcus remained in his home on Pelican Drive, but the neighborhood had changed for the better. The new HOA board focused on genuinely helpful community services rather than punitive enforcement, and residents worked together to maintain property values through cooperation rather than intimidation. The experience taught Marcus that standing up to abuse of authority, even when it seems overwhelming, can lead to positive changes that benefit entire communities. His house had survived Hurricane Elena through careful preparation, but his determination to fight injustice had ultimately protected all his neighbors from a different kind of storm. The corruption that had threatened to destroy their community from within. Mrs. Chen often reminded him that heroes come in many forms, and sometimes the most important victories happen not during natural disasters, but in the aftermath when people choose to do what's right despite the personal cost. Marcus's story became a reminder that proper preparation protects against more than just hurricanes. It also provides the strength to weather any storm that life might bring.